Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast. My guest this week is DOP Vincent Wrenn. Vincent has worked on an absolute ton of projects, having started at a young age working with his father, who was a DOP. Learning lots of lessons from his dad, he then went on to work on short films, television productions, big movies. He's also worked on high-profile documentaries with a very impressive guest roster. I chatted to Vincent about what it's like being a DOP. We talked about micro-budget, short films, his tips for working on those. We also talked about networking, so his tips for making those contacts and finding the next job. Enjoy. First off, I normally start by asking people how they got into the business, but I understand you've got a familial family connection to filmmaking. Tell me about that.
I do. So yeah, I'm second generation. I always say that I never really had a choice, and feels like it's kind of true. My dad is a DP or was a DP, and like my earliest memories are on a film set. So I got out of high school and didn't have an enormous amount of direction. And by the next week, I was an electrician on a commercial and did a lot of set days during my high school years as well. And ran that, learned a lot, and then got out of the business, went to college, traveled, and that's when I really found like a real love for telling visual stories. When I was away from the gear and away from the guys, and I came back and really focused on shooting after that.
Yeah. And it's funny because when I first looked at your IMDb, I was like, how has he been on this many productions? And he's not that old. So that explains it, working from straight away on all these big films. What, with your dad being DOP cinematographer, what's some of the sort of big lessons he taught you, do you think?
Well, so he was both like in the beginning when I was starting to shoot my own stuff, he was like a confidant, I could call him, before I did a shoot, and I was like, okay, let's talk about the line. And so in a technical way, he was there for me, but we really like connected as father and son in some ways on set. I didn't see him a lot through high school. He was always out on a movie or on a commercial or whatever. And I started, eventually I gaffed for him, but only after I gaffed elsewhere. He never gave me the first, I always had to get ready, go up a step on the ladder without him hiring me to do so. And then I started camera operating for him. And that's when I really got like 14 hours a day, 6 days a week kind of thing on set with him. And I learned an enormous amount, just like you do anytime you're working closely with the DP. But this DP, I could go and pick his brain later, so it's invaluable.
Yeah. And is there anything kind of outside of the technical side that you think he taught you and that's important for people to know, want to do it as a career?
Well, he's definitely not short of isms. One of the things that I've learned as I've worked with other people that knew my dad on set, that he has like an enormous amount of like respect from crew guys, and he was a crew guy. He came up through lighting and equipped, and so he knows what he's asking for. But one of his isms was always first rule: protect the women. So like if you're in a lighting situation and you have to make a sacrifice, you don't sacrifice the female lead in any given situation. So that's something that stayed with me. The other ism that I heard him say a lot was that some DPs paint with a fine brush and he uses a roller. So he really wanted to, which I always thought was insane. But he really wants to lay down a base layer and give the actors the freedom to move around in a space and not have to hit the exact hard mark where they're lit perfectly, but like make them look good anywhere in a given space.
Excellent.
Which is really something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, which is really something that's come into fashion in the last decade or so, not the last quarter century. So he was a little ahead of it. Then I was listening to a conversation with Ed Lockman the other day, and he said the same thing, that he'd recently grown into lighting for spaces as opposed to lighting for marks.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because it is, especially if you're working on low or micro budget, you might not have as much time as you would have on a big production. So hitting the marks is super important. But if you, like you say, if you want something to look beautiful, then yeah, I guess you shouldn't really be thinking about stuff like that when you first get into that space. So looking at your IMDb, obviously you've done TV, films, loads of short movies. So if I start with the short films, what makes a successful short film, do you think? And I'll break this into two, and I'll start with the actual shoot for the short film. So what makes a successful short film shoot?
Okay. And I think this is true at any running time. The key to production is pre-production. I mean, every time, all the time. And a short film is especially true, right? Because you have no money, you have no time. Everything is working against you on like this hyper level on a short film. Usually, not always, but usually. So I think that really knowing the game plan, there's so many problems that you're not going to see coming that you need to solve all the ones that you can see coming prior to ever showing up on set. I just did a short film, my first in a really long time, actually, my first narrative in a really long time, 3 weeks ago or something. And I probably went back to the location with the director and sometimes not, with my gaffer, 6 times and just sat in the space and walked through and talked through things over and over again. And pretty much everything we talked about played out. But there wasn't, and there was a ton of stuff to figure out on the day on top of that. But all the broad strokes, from the rig that I designed for outside, we're shooting on the second story. So I had reflectors coming in through the window with lights on the ground, with a rig on a scissor lift, and I was on a short jib arm inside, and all of that ended up working really well. But it would have just been guesswork if we hadn't gone with the tape measure and really, really talked it out.
Yeah, and talking it out is important, especially as a director myself. Sometimes it's hard to articulate exactly what you're asking for, and you might also think you've explained exactly what you're after, but then when you get all the equipment and the people in, suddenly it feels like I'm asking for something brand new. Whereas in my head, I'm like, I've told him about that 3 weeks ago,
Right.
but you've obviously everything changes when you get on set. So that's the shoot. What do you think makes a successful short film?
That is something for people to sit down and watch. I think you have a better shot of making a short film if you're not trying to make a very, very, very short movie, but you're trying to capture a moment. You don't have to get caught up in explaining everything. The audience doesn't have to understand everything. Give them a great scene. Give them a great moment. Don't try to cram 3 acts into 14 and a half minutes or whatever, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people try to make is they want to tell a complete story, and you don't have to. I mean, how many great TV shows don't tell a complete story? In any given, granted, there's going to be something coming, but if you watch a short film and you really want to know what happened, or you're inclined to write your own in, then that's a win.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best ones I've seen, so I've judged a couple of film competitions. The best ones I've seen grab you straight away with something. They pull you in very quickly. So I encourage people to stop doing these 10-minute credit sequences with, do you know what I mean, that make you think you're about to watch The Godfather or something. You don't need all the credits. You need to just get people into the film straight away.
Absolutely.
And then, like you say, if you can have that level of intrigue at the end, and you don't need to wrap everything up. So that's definitely good advice there. Is there anything you would advise, coming from a sort of DOP cinematographer, to save budget when you're doing something like a short film?
Well, pre-production. I mean, I'll go back to that. Every shot, actually, yeah, it's twofold, right? So every shot, philosophically, I believe, should propel the story, should make the audience want to know what's going to happen next. Or answer a question finally that has been pushed out from the other shots. But every frame, you shouldn't cut if you're not telling the audience something new, if you're not making them wonder about something new. And I think if you have every shot dialed in and you know that you're not wasting time on set, then that's going to be more budget friendly.
Yeah, definitely. And Is there a is there like a piece of equipment, or is there like I know DOPs love a belt and with all things in it and attachments and tape and blah blah blah. Is there like a little bit of kit that you're like, I can't live without that, and I've not seen many people use it, or is it something that everybody's got?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, based on this last short that I shot, I have a it's like a Dana dolly, but it's a little beefier. It takes
Mhm.
like 800-pound loads, and you can stand on it. You can put a riser on it, and I used this thing called a Debbie dolly with an 18-inch telescoping riser and like a 4-foot jib, maybe 4.5-foot jib, and it was a very small
Mhm.
space. And everyone was like, "God, you're going to bring a jib in here?" But what it allowed me to do is this,
Mhm.
like that. I could reframe so fast. We could find shots that we weren't sure about so fast. If I needed to pop off, I could do it really quickly. But the jib was like, it wasn't just a time saver, it was a creative expander because you didn't
Mm.
have to go, I wonder what it would look like. You could just push the dolly down the track a little bit and, oh, this over is awesome. Let's just get it real quick or whatever.
Yeah.
So a little jib, man. Also, and the reason I push for a little jib over a gimbal is because no matter how good you are at the gimbal, it's still going to be a little bit of this. And I really wanted to come up and lock and let this
Yeah.
dialogue play out right here, solid with intention. And that's
Yeah.
what it really allowed for was the intention behind the movement. And it wasn't just like, and I did a lot of like uh, motivated by the emotion and the performance, little push-ins
Mm.
and stuff, and that was also very freeing, which you would do on a gimbal. But when I stopped, I stopped.
Mm. Yeah, that drives me nuts. As soon as you see a camera shot, as soon as you see even the this little wobble or move, it completely ruins the illusion. And it's the same with drone shots. If you sense that the drone's kind of gone off a little bit
Yep.
or something, you've lost me. And yeah, those sorts of moves, I love those sorts of moves. What about so moving into like television, feature films, and TV? What's the biggest noticeable difference? Obviously, there's more money and more people, but is there some sort of professionalism jump for you, or is it exactly the same?
I mean, there doesn't have to be. There usually is. But
Mm.
I've done shorts where like the first AD was the first AD from Pirates of the Caribbean, right? So on
Oh
something
right.
like, you know, what I mean, for real. Like I think that's
Mm.
actually the movie that he had just been on. It was a
Mm.
long time ago. We also shot it on 35. I actually completely forgot about this short until right now. We shot on 35. The bail bondsman from Jackie Brown was in it. I don't remember his name, Forrester or something. He was awesome.
Robert Forrester.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Robert Forrester, amazing dude, amazing to work around.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had, you know, I had we shot it on Panavision cameras, and we had 18Ks, and I had guys, and in that way, it was very much like 3 days of a feature film.
Mm.
And it was off of a feature film that we were doing. Like, and so a ton of those guys just came off and went and did this with us. Um,
Yeah.
and then I've done short films where it was like this last short film. I had one person on set that had anywhere near the set time that I had.
Mm.
Everyone else was like a lot of good attitude, you know, but not a lot of experience. Um,
Yeah.
there was like running a set is so critical and so hard to do, and you can't explain it, right? You have to be around it and watch it happen. So I can talk to the first AD who's never been a first AD before and say this is your job, but you know, like they're not going to keep a set quiet. You just can't
Mm.
expect them to. It's just not. It takes a long time, and that's why you know you're a second, and you become a first AD, and you know how to do it.
Yeah.
So it's really about the experience of the guys, and short films are inherently or should be about everyone getting a chance to step up, you know. But they should still probably have done some time on set beyond that.
Mm. Yeah. And if you're so say you're at your DOP, you're putting your team together. Obviously, you're going to pick people you've worked with before and you know who are good. But if you were bringing somebody new into that team, what would you be looking for?
Well, um, I would want them to. So I think that a good technician, um, and I was a pretty good step lighting tech. And one of the things that I did, and I've tried to share with new guys, is in 2025, don't look at your phone. Look at the person you work for. And when the person looks around because they need something, you're going to make eye contact with them. And you are going to be there to help save the day right then in that moment. And you're going to make the set move smoother. So attention, first and foremost, attention. If you don't have experience, pay attention. And you'll learn in the process, I did a short years ago. I don't remember what we shot it on, but my first AC I'd never met. I'd never met the gaffer. The producer called me and asked me to do it. The director and I ended up being pretty good friends after that. And the first AC I brought on to 15 jobs after that because she was on it. And I didn't have to look for her. I didn't have to tell her what was next. I didn't have to ask her to do things. She was just like, bam. She was so fast, so fast. And that's the name of the game. It's a battle, definitely. Right? It's a battle between with time and money. And depending on which one you have is who you fight with more, because one can buy the other. But
yeah, definitely. And the gratitude as well you feel when you've got those people around you, you can rely on.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Adds a safety net, and it adds a bit more headspace for yourself to get on with your own stuff.
100%.
So then the other thing I was going to ask you about was, I've seen in your resume you've done a bunch of like documentaries, probably where you've had to sit down with famous people, light them, and someone else is conducting an interview.
Yep.
What have you learned from that? And is it ever intimidating with those names, getting that right?
Is it ever intimidating? I mean, yeah, sometimes. I mean, I'm as a cinematographer, I get to hide behind my camera, and I get to hide behind my meter, and I get to hide behind my lights. I'm not front facing in the same way a director is or a producer is. It is also very important to engage and make the person that's sitting in front of your camera under your lights feel comfortable and feel safe, if you will. So everyone's a little different. I did an interview with Dr. Dre probably half a dozen times. The interview in Defiant Ones, I relit, reframed everything like 5 different times, I think. And I also interviewed his mom, and so he was there for that, and he was there for a couple of the other interviews, and it definitely became very cordial and laid back over time. I've interviewed a bunch of big politicians, and I interviewed a Secretary of State, I interviewed head of national security, and both of those people at the time, I don't know if I was intimidated, but I definitely was surprised about how much respect I inherently just had for them. It didn't matter if I agreed with their politics or anything like that. It's like, God, you have the pressure of, I think I have pressure because I need to make my day, and you start wars or you end wars. Like, that's a lot of weight on someone's shoulders. And so I've definitely been taken aback by some of the people that I've interviewed.
Yeah, there is a lot of pressure there, isn't there? Because if it's the last thing you want is to get to the edit suite and find out you've missed something because you've been kind of in awe of the person you've been interviewing.
That'd be the worst.
Yeah, and the thing I find is, because I'm a fair share of camera work where I've been behind the camera, is sometimes I'll meet people, say weeks after an interview, and they won't even recognize me because all they've seen is kind of half my face hidden behind this camera, but I've spent the entire day with them, which is always strange. So is there anything, sorry, that's what I was going to ask you was, so on all of this stuff, how closely are you working with the people who grade it?
That's a great question. It's a fun question. So Age of Disclosure is a movie that is not out yet, but just premiered at South by Southwest. I'm surprised it doesn't have distribution, and maybe it does. I haven't talked to the director in a couple of weeks, but I don't know what's next for it. And to have left South by Southwest and predicted that we still wouldn't have a deal would have blown I just didn't. It was sold out it ran twice, opening weekend and a couple days later, 1,200 people, like all kinds of great names showed up. I just thought for sure. That film, I was by far the most involved in post-production. I got to give feedback on every phase of the edit, and saw positive effects from those notes. And so I would make more notes. And I was in the coloring process the entire time, and it was great. I learned a lot. I don't know how many how many low budget features I've shot, but like 6 or 7. And I always had this attitude of like, hey, I don't care who it is, as long as he knows the tools, I can get the look if I have the time. I don't believe that anymore. We changed colors, and I made a different looking film with the different colors. There was things put out on offer that weren't put out in another way or by another person, and it did change the look of interviews. The nuts and bolts are all still there. The look is still the same, but like the like how much blue is in the shadows and stuff changed, because it was offered. I'm like, no, that's amazing. Stay with that. So I think that one of the regrets that I have for my career as a cinematographer actually is not having like my colorist, like not having built a relationship with a colorist on my third low budget movie and just stayed with them after that. And I think I do encourage that. Build a relationship, have that person in your corner, and fight for them. If they're great and they're right for the project, fight for them, and it'll like help the cohesion of your vision the whole time, because we're losing control in post, right? Age of Disclosure, I had near total control. Obviously, there's other people who were weighing in on that. Hidden in Plain Sight, which was like the opposite end of the budget spectrum, I colored myself. It was sent to me. Someone did a pass, and I said, we can't. This isn't going to work. And basically, it's like, well, we can't afford to have this person colored anymore. And so I just said, give it to me raw. And I'm not a colorist. I'm not good at this. I don't know the tools well. It probably took me, I don't know, over 100 hours to color an hour-long, 54-minute film. I don't really know how long it took, but it was a really long time. My wife will tell you it was way too long. But I didn't want to go to film festivals and not be proud of it. And I couldn't not do it, right? It was, I didn't get paid a dime for it. And then Defiant Ones, I had zero input on the coloring. And in all honesty, when that film came out, I'd kind of forgotten about it. It was like a year or more later, and I was just like driving down Hollywood Boulevard, and I saw like 3 Defiant Ones posters at the same time. I'm like, oh, that's right. And that's how so I was uninvolved in post. I was also not the only DP on that.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm not a DOP, but if I was, I would definitely want to be super involved in the grade, because like you say, it's sort of working with your creativity, and you could go horribly wrong if you do a bad job, or it could kind of make everything pop and sing. So I bet there's a little bit of anxiety if you're not connected with that grader.
And with Defiant Ones, it was HBO, and Alan Hughes was the director, and I had no doubt that it was going to look great. Like zero worries that it was going to be top notch. And if you look at if you pay attention to that documentary for its post production, for the editing, for the sound design, and all that, it's through the roof. I mean, I'm not saying it makes the film. The film itself is very strong, but like the presentation is amazing in that. But yeah, the smaller it gets, well, at any level, you should fight for as much control, as possible. Age of Disclosure, I actually put it in my contract, which is I never remember to do stuff like that. And the line producer assured me that it would be, I would be 100% part of the process all the way to, release.
That is an interesting one for DOPs to consider, when they get to a certain level, if they want to be involved with the color grade, for sure. So the other thing that people potentially might struggle with is networking, and is finding the next job after the one you're doing, because I'm assuming you're kind of like freelance, aren't you? You sort of jump from job to job. So what's your advice for that? How do you build the network to get onto the next job?
That is my second big regret of my career is I didn't go to more parties. I didn't go to more premieres. I had a
Yeah.
kid, and I would rather be playing with my 2-year-old at the time than driving to Hollywood and going to a party. And that was, inconvenient timing. I don't regret it. I don't think really. I mean, I regret not going to more parties. I don't regret spending more time with my kid.
Yeah,
I
I
wish
get
I could
it.
do both. But parties are where the next job happens. Drinks are where the next job happens. Go to coffees. Go to any party that you're invited to. Go to any premiere. I passed on those opportunities so often that when I did show up, people were like, everyone would talk about the fact that I was there and how weird it was. And then eventually, you just quit getting invited. So show up. That's the should you go to the AST luncheons and open houses? Yeah, if you're in LA, you probably should. I never did, but you probably should. Should you find a mentor? It can't hurt. It also can't hurt just to be on set and be around the same people. You don't have to go to AST open house to work with an AST DP. You can work on a TV show or a feature film as a camera assistant or as a set lighting technician and learn so much and be around the best in the world. But building those relationships and making those connections at parties is probably the single best way to find your next job. And I mean, that's sort of true. And it's also so like the last day you're on your last job is probably the best way to find your next job. If you rule on the last day of the last job, you're going to be remembered. And people on set are going to remember, even if they're not the ones that hired you, they're going to recommend you.
Yeah, definitely. They'll go, oh yeah, I know someone, just finished a job with him. He's really good. You should get him.
90% of it. I just moved to the East Coast, and I've done more sitting down with strangers and having coffee in the last 6 months than I have in the last 20 years. And I'm in no way exaggerating to make my point. Like, I truly have sat down with more strangers and had coffee than I have in the last 20 years. And it's awful. And it's also totally fine. And it's going to make a huge difference in the next 6 years or 7 years of my life. So never hesitate to reach out and ask for 5 minutes or for 15 minutes with someone for coffee either, I think that it's different in LA, and maybe I've just decided it's different in LA. But if you're in a smaller market, reach out to anybody you want, man. Like, what are they going to do? Not call you back?
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that. And I'd say, especially if you're looking at people whose career, looking for that mentor figure, even if all it ends up with is a short phone conversation asking for a bit of advice, it's so worth connecting with those people, because they'll remember you later on, because it probably happens a lot less than you would think. People, connecting and trying to get in touch just for a bit of advice and a bit of mentorship.
A very old regret. I moved to LA in 2000, and Haskell Wexler, who's an absolute hero of mine, great cinematographer and great political activist. He did a documentary called The Bus Riders Union, and it had a small screening, and I went to it, and I'm like 28 and maybe a little younger, and I almost walked up to him and gave him my phone number written down on a piece of paper and said, I work for free. And I chickened out, and I didn't do it. And he was so approachable. He's like the nicest, most docile person you're ever going to meet. I mean, he was just so approachable, and I still chickened out and didn't do it, and definitely regret it.
Oh, you've done all right. You've done all right.
It's been okay. But Haskell was, he was, he changed the world. I mean, he changed what we do.
Yeah. It's a tough one, that, isn't it? Because I've been in lots of similar situations, actually, especially in Cannes. We used to go to Cannes every year. Used to be a lot of famous people,
right?
And a lot of people you really admire, filmmakers, actors, all sorts. And you and you do want to go and speak to them.
Right.
But then there is this part of you that kicks in, self-conscious part. Then you start thinking about what they're up to and how you're going to ruin their day and interrupt. You know, it's that, and then you shrink in. You know, it's yeah. An event, I can see it totally a great place to approach someone if they're at an event and they've screened a film or something, because you obviously talk about the project.
Film festivals are especially rough. You have to really pick and choose because like they're getting a version of you and maybe a more star-eyed version of you the whole time. If they're really A-list celebrities, right? Or you know, if they're famous enough, they're going to be getting this like constant barrage and like, God, all I want to do is have a cigarette and be left alone for 10 minutes. So you do have to pick and choose at festivals, I think, and see what kind of conversations can come up organically.
Yeah, definitely, because they don't want to hear a 10-minute rant about how amazing they are.
No, right?
They might want a little bit. But,
you do want a little bit. We got to get good at giving them that too. I'm not good at giving them that. I'm always like, good to meet you, and I just act like they're not famous and I don't know them, you know. And sometimes I don't, which is always rewarding.
Yes.
You know, on that note, I don't think it's too much of a digression. When I went to South by. I went for a film, and I always said I wouldn't go to South by, I wouldn't go to Sundance or anything like that until I had a movie in it. I didn't want to be just one of those guys. They're like, nope, but hi. And what I learned was that I had no time to do anything except for see one of my best friends, who I shot his first feature. He post-production produced a documentary. I made sure to go to his premiere. That was it. Everything else was about the film I was there promoting, or the film that I brought to the festival. And so don't necessarily wait until you have a movie in a film festival to go, because you won't have time to do all the things you want to do at a film festival.
Yeah, definitely agree with that, because there's a level of anxiety and stress when your movie's showing as well that kind of prevents you from relaxing enough to network with people.
Right, and there's already parties that you have to go to, and you have to go to the sound check or the video checks, and you have to, you're committed. You're more committed than you think you're going to be.
I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If I was to point you to another one, it would be how to get a famous actor in your 30k micro budget feature with Mitchel Tolliday. This is a really interesting chat I had recently with an indie filmmaker who raised the money to make his first feature and even managed to get Simon Callow to appear in it. Thanks for listening.